Welcome to the Champion's Corner, where sales training meets the mindset of a champion. I'm Kelly McLean, former Canadian champion, world bronze medalist, and your coach in the world of sales. I took the discipline, focus, and resilience from boxing and brought it into business. Here, we turn sales pros into sales champions with real tactics and winning mindsets. So lace up, keep your guard up, and let's get to work. You're in the Champion's Corner. Hello everybody, Kelly McLean here. Before I get started on round 9, I first wanted just to thank everybody for tuning in. I see that there's a lot of people from around the globe that are listening to the podcast, and I'm very much appreciative. Thank you. Round 9 is called The Corner. It's a powerful title, because it represents much more than the 60-second break that you get between rounds. It's a place of reflection, truth, coaching, trust, and transformation. There comes a moment in every fight when the bell rings, and for 60 seconds, the punches stop. And it's a nice feeling, that's for sure, when you go to the corner. But it's not just about resting. You're not going there just to sit down and rest. You're going there to listen to your coach. And usually when you're sitting down, you're breathing hard. You might be winning. You might be losing. Sometimes you don't even know if you're winning or losing. You can't even tell. And then something remarkable really happens. Okay, for 1 minute, someone else sees the fight more clearly than you do. Welcome back to 12 Rounds CS, round 9. Today's lesson, it isn't about throwing punches. It's about what happens when you stop long enough to learn. This is the corner. A boxing truth. A lot of people who have never boxed often think that the corner is simply a place to catch your breath. It isn't. It's a strategy session. It's where the trainer sees what the fighter cannot see. And, when you're in the middle of exchanging punches, oftentimes, your vision narrows. You're reacting, you're surviving, you're focused on the opponent standing in front of you. But your trainer is watching the entire ring. He notices things you don't. He'll notice things like his right hand drops after every jab, or you're backing up too straight, or you're stop loading up, you're winning with your jab. Sometimes the greatest adjustment in a fight isn't changing your opponent, it's changing yourself. One lesson boxing taught me is that confidence can become very dangerous. There were fights where I believed my original game plan would eventually work, so I kept forcing it. I threw the same combinations, I chased the same openings, I became predictable. Then I returned to the corner, and my coach would quietly say, "Mark, you're fighting his fight, not yours." Those words have stayed with me long after my boxing career because they apply to every area of my life. Sometimes we become so committed to our plan that we stop paying attention to reality. That's not confidence, that's stubbornness. Champions should know the difference. Champions know the difference. The sales translation. Salespeople do this every day. A presentation doesn't go well. A prospect goes quiet. An objection keeps coming up. A proposal sits unanswered. What do many people do? They simply try harder using the same approach. More emails, more pressure, more talking, but not more thinking. The best sales professionals pause. They review the conversation. They ask, what did I miss? What wasn't said? Did I really understand the customer's priorities? Am I solving the right problem? Every client interaction deserves its own corner because every conversation teaches you something if you're willing to listen. There's really a leadership lesson here. This isn't just about sales. It's about leadership. The strongest leaders I've worked with weren't the ones who always had the answers. They were the ones willing to ask better questions. They invited feedback. They challenged their own assumptions. They surrounded themselves with people who would tell them the truth, not just what they wanted to hear. And we have lots of friends who do that. You need to get the truth. Your corner should never be filled with cheerleaders. It should be filled with truth tellers. People who care enough to say, you're drifting. You're avoiding the hard conversation. You can do better. Those people are priceless. Life puts us in corners too, After a failed relationship, after losing a job, after a health scare, and I had one of those, I'll talk about that in just a minute. After being disappointed, after success, Those moments are our chance to breathe, reflect and decide who we want to be when the next round begins. I know this personally. After my bypass surgery, and that was probably about 2 years ago, I had a quadruple bypass surgery, and I can tell you, I really recognized what was important in life. I remember I laid in bed for 3 weeks in intensive care, and that chapter forced me to sit in my own corner, that's for sure. I had to really listen to myself, listen to the doctors. It was really an amazing time to reflect on life and what I did, where I'm at, and what was really important in life. I took the opportunity to ask myself some uncomfortable questions, not just, how do I recover, but, how do I live differently? What do I need to change? Let's move into the championship principle. Here's something I've come to really believe. The people who improve the fastest aren't the smartest. They aren't the most talented. They aren't even the hardest working. They're the most coachable, okay? They're very coachable. Coachability is one of the rarest qualities you'll ever find because it requires humility. Humility says, I don't know everything. Someone else might see something I can't. Changing my approach isn't admitting failure, it's pursuing excellence. That's how champions think. As fighters, we don't win because we never get hit. We win because we learn between rounds. As sales professionals, we don't succeed because every meeting goes perfectly. We succeed because every conversation makes us better. And in life, your greatest growth rarely happens while you're throwing punches. It happens when you're sitting quietly in your corner, listening, reflecting, and adjusting, preparing for the next round. Because championships aren't won by people who know everything. They're won by people who never stop learning. I remember when the Canadian team was fighting in Sweden. I was on that team, and I was fighting, Sweden's top guy. He was European champion, and he was on the front page of the Swedish national newspaper. They were touting his accolades, and obviously I was a little bit nervous. I was fighting one of their best fighters, and when we got into the ring, I remember I was nervous for sure, and my coach was calming me down. And after the first round, I felt like a ball in a pinball machine. I didn't do very well in that first round. And when I sat down in the corner, I remember my coach, who was Hungarian, he actually slapped me across the head. Good thing I was wearing headgear, because I was thinking to myself, the Swedish guys beat me. Now my coach, who's from Hungary, was beating me too. He looked me straight in the eyes and said, Mark, in his Hungarian accent, you need to box. You need to keep boxing. You need to box. And I was thinking to myself, no kidding. But his advice was plain. He was saying that he didn't want me doing fancy stuff, trying to do my own thing. He wanted me to just stick to the basics of boxing. So I went out into the second round, and I did just that, left hand up, right hand up, left jab, straight right hand, left hook, side step, He wanted me to go back to the basics of boxing, okay? And so I knew exactly what he meant. And so I came back after the second round, and he said to me, this time he didn't punch me in the side of the head. He said, Mark, keep boxing, keep boxing. So I went out for the third round and did well, okay? I stuck to the boxing program that he always taught me to do, went back to the basics. And after the third round, the decision went to me. I won by split decision. I actually won the Silver Cup for Best Fighter of the Evening, and it went really well. But it goes to show how coaching had such an impact on me between rounds, because I was fighting the fight that I thought I should have fought, and he saw something totally different. And when he told me in the corner, Mark, you have to change your game plan, basically by small words, box, 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 and a slap in the head to smarten me up. I remember when we were taking our bus back from Uppsala, Sweden, back to Stockholm, Sweden. I think it was a 3-hour drive or something. It was a little bit later at night. It was after the fights. We all had gotten onto the bus, and I sat right beside Nick, my coach. And so I drummed up some courage to ask him, why he didn't give me a whole lot of instruction, during the match. And he said to me, Mark, he said, I gave you everything you needed to know. He said, you needed to go back to the basics of boxing. He said, you got away from the basics. and I need you to go back to the basics. Left jab, right hand, left hook. And I did catch on, as I told you I did. But it was nice to hear from him because I was wondering why he hadn't said more, okay? He basically just said what I needed to know, and that was get back to the basics of boxing. I also remember, we hadn't eaten after the fights. After the fights were over, we got onto the bus almost right after that and started to drive back to Stockholm. And my coach named Nick, he was a diabetic, and I remember he had an orange. I think he just had the one orange left, and probably he needed it for his sugar levels. But he said, Mark, he passed me the orange and said, you're going to need this. You're probably quite hungry. It's funny because it was something that was so simple, but here I am so many years later, over 40 years later, and I remember that gesture so well. And I just thought it was just strong leadership on his part, and I never forgot it. Thanks for joining, everybody. We'll see you in round 10.
That's it for this round of the Champions Corner. If you're serious about leveling up, head over to markkellymclean.com and join my free VIP club. You'll get access to knockout sales strategies in every new podcast episode. While you're there, sign up for my sales training program or book me to lead a seminar for your team. I'm Mark Kelly McLean. Stay sharp, stay hungry, and I'll see you in the next episode.